YouTuber and influencer are now the top dream careers. I don't know if you've heard this fact, crops up from time to time. People are absolutely livid about it. Kids these days just want to get viral off TikToks. When I was a boy, all we ever wanted was to work in an obviously unnecessary temporary office job. Anyway, it's not even really true. The only source I could find for that fact is a survey that LEGO did of some particularly annoying children. But I guess it's the sort of thing that gets the people going. I think because actually a lot of people have some sort of social media based creative side hustle that they would love to metabolize into an income source. And the tech companies agree. They say now is a better time than ever for creators. Anyone can create, everyone has the tools, anyone can build a fan base of thousands. You don't need a label or a studio, a publisher or a distributor. The old gatekeepers are gone, you can do it yourself. Which is all very true. The only thing they failed to mention is that you cannot make a living doing that, and there is no alternative. Even to the biggest musicians in the world, streaming royalties are a joke, just like a funny prank. Instead, they're forced into barely breaking even on tours. Bonafide authors are selling better than ever before at a loss. I've yet to claim the $2 of ad revenue that I've built up here. You cannot make a living from creating. I'm not bitter, I'm not saying where's my money. I think it's a larger issue. It affects everyone, because at the very least you have to consume this shit. So actually it's very big of me. Not that anyone making anything should be compensated for it. Obviously if you're making dog shit that no one likes, you can't really expect a return on that. And to make stuff that people would like, it takes time, right? You need training and practice, and you don't get paid for that. So you're going to have to live kind of poorly for a while. It's just sort of accepted as what an artist needs to do, and that's fine. And then actually making something good takes more time than you'd think. I've been working on this series on and off since last year, and it's borderline. But you know, we've had those filters for like a century, and they work. The only problem now is that you never reach the end of that. You never tip over into being viable. You can make content that's good and valuable to hundreds of thousands of people and still not be making a living. What you can make a living from is branding. If you have enough social capital to sell merch or crowdfund or endorse products or appeal to what's left of traditional media and try and weasel your way in. You can make money doing that, and if you're impossibly lucky, you can make a living doing that. But your work is still worthless because content has been devalued. Now, the tech industry is built on this dominance business model. The less financially viable your business model is, the better. The more money you lose, the less anyone can compete with you. They make a platform, lose billions up front, scoop up all of the users by hemorrhaging money, so the consumers love it because they're getting great value, and no one can compete with you because you're losing money like a fuckwit. And then they think they'll lower their costs, jack up the prices, and because the users will have nowhere else left to go, they'll be the last man standing, and they'll switch from losing money to making a lot of money. And the people who think this are fucking morons. So Spotify loses $2.5 million every day, Netflix is $14 billion in debt, and doing this isn't quite as problem-free as you might imagine. As I've mentioned before, it puts them in the business of ensuring a cultural and technological stagnation, and here they're sort of directly devaluing content. Like when Spotify got into streaming, they deliberately set their subscription prices unjustifiably low in an attempt to kill their competition, which obviously hasn't worked out for them, just everyone else adopted those prices. Now, all of those subscriptions go into a pool, and then Spotify pays the royalties out of that, divided up by what percentage of the streams each artist got that month. And then the labels take their cut off that cut. So the artists end up getting a percentage of Spotify's worthless revenue, which obviously ends up being jack shit. So Spotify's business model is directly decreasing the value of music. But again, it's not quite as problem-free as you might imagine. Spotify's filled with fraud. You can list a fake song and then get a botnet of dummy accounts to stream it, and at scale, that's a low-risk way of generating money. Or even actual musicians will create like ambient music under different names so that they can get onto those generic cafe playlists. And that stuff's going to get more streams and revenue than their actual work. Now, because of the way that Spotify pulls all the revenue and then pays artists their percentage out of that, this sort of thing actually eats away at what percentage artists are getting. And Spotify ignores all this. They ignore the fraud because actually it makes their numbers look better. And they were able to get away with this because there was no regulation in place, and they just went straight to the labels and said, if you don't let us do this, everyone's just going to steal your music anyway. So we will give you a few cents where you used to get actual money, plus a centralized promotional platform. And instead of negotiating for music to have value, the labels accepted this and made deals for favorable playlist placement and chart listings and promotional space. A recent one was, no it wasn't, a recent one at the time that I wrote this, and I haven't had the time to swap out this example, Drake had released an album ad-free. Now, because of the way that Spotify pays out royalties, stopping ads on an album means that every non-Drake artist paid for that album. A fraction of a cent each. Like the plot of Superman 3. That's the reference that I'm going with. Anyway, the idea is that, yes, this system is exploitative now, it is devaluing content now, but eventually they will have to make money. Eventually it'll level out. At some point they'll have to turn a profit. So the content will slow down and their prices will go up, and in spite of that, their subscription count will keep rising. It's a very charming idea. Now, Netflix. The first time that Netflix ever made money was at the start of the coronavirus. They had to stop production, they had to stop spending, but their subscription count kept ticking up. So they decided they could do it. Now was the time to pivot to being profitable. So they're spending less, they're producing less, and coincidentally, for the first time ever, they've lost subscribers. Instead of eventually leveling out, what really happens is these companies tank the industry that they're in and then die out. They've been throwing money at the wall trying to ruin their competition, but what's actually happened is their competition has changed. They're now competing against loss leaders for companies that are bigger than them. Companies that don't care if they're losing money on streaming because it's promotion for their brand. Netflix or Spotify aren't gonna beat Amazon or Apple. They've just driven culture into the ground for no fucking reason at all. Not that everything's bad now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to come across, I'm not saying that movies used to be better, right? Mostly for optics reasons. Probably is what I think, but I don't want it to seem like what I think. But Caleb, surely there's all these independent content creators now. I'm watching this on YouTube and this is the best thing I've ever seen. You idiot. You fucking moron. Oh, yeah, thanks. That's very nice. Yeah, no, let me address that. Since I've been making YouTube content, people want to know, how much do I make? Which is interesting. People don't normally ask you that. No one was asking me that when I worked at McDonald's. I did only work there for a day, so maybe that's not a good example, but I guess YouTuber is seen as attainable, easy money. Right now, you're probably thinking, oh, I could do what he's doing, and that's absolutely correct, but this is worth fuck all. Online advertising is measured in cost per mil, which is short for cost per thousand. It's going to be all over the place depending on what you're doing. Like, this video will be worth like, I don't know, $2 because there's not a ton of advertising that's going to go nicely with this. But if I were doing like crypto investment advice, it'd be somewhere like $10 to $20 because obviously the kind of people watching that sort of thing are fucking rude. But the all-time average is like $5, which $5 for 1,000 views, that's pretty cool. $5,000 for 1,000,000 views, or some bits of a cent per person. Then of course half of that is going to go to the platform, Google or Amazon or whoever, which isn't so bad as long as you're getting hundreds of thousands of views every week and you never stop and you never get copyright claimed and you never get demonetized and no one's heard of uBlock Origin. You're potentially sitting above the poverty line. You're nowhere near a livable wage, but it's good to have goals. You have to get viewing figures comparable to an actual entire network TV show to make enough money for one person. But it's not like Google or Amazon are particularly scamming their content creators. Their online advertising is just genuinely that worthless. Now, one of the content creators affected by this had a few millions of his parents' money, and he decided to solve the exploitation of the online media landscape by combining a social media with a payment processor, and they take more sensible cuts. Well, it can bloat. I think theoretically they can take almost half of it, but it's usually sitting somewhere around 20 to 30%. Of course, the problem with Patreon for a lot of people is it adds work. In addition to whatever you're trying to fund, you now have to make extra stuff. And the general trend is that setting up a Patreon marks a shift from someone trying to just do a little something on the side to really trying to pursue it full time. Now, out of all the content creators earning on that platform, less than 1% actually make a livable wage from it. And that's not including people who aren't earning anything. The vast majority of people who make $0. They're generally absent from all statistics because, you know, maybe they just fully set up their creator account as a joke or something. But Patreon itself is doing well. They're currently valued at $4 billion, and the pandemic unemployment drastically increased their creator base, and they've done a great job of marketing themselves. Look at these 5 people who are successful. Don't look at the 99% who fail out of it. But across the board in new media, you will not profit unless you are absolutely on the top. And to be in with a shot, you basically have to be producing content full time. YouTube, Twitch, TikTok all require daily content. You don't have to make something good, you just have to make something now. You have to make massive amounts of low effort content constantly. Or you could do this, which is of no value to anyone and has no financial future. But it's typical for this full-time losing money, throwing content into the void to go on for years before you see any return. A successful Kickstarter requires like 3 years of full-time brand building up front. The only hope for a fully independent artist on Spotify is that you just have an impossible viral hit. And who can even afford to attempt that, right? It's like quitting your job to become a full-time lottery ticket purchaser, but riskier. Don't get me wrong, I'm not insanely bitter. I'm just saying it's a bigger problem. But at least the tech platforms aren't the only option. There's still traditional media. Dying traditional media, where it's standard to do multiple unpaid internships. The basic logic there is it's easier to turn a profit if you use slave labor. People who don't have a mass of generational wealth find these internships exploitative and difficult, and they're often unable to support themselves through it, so they have to leave the creative industries entirely. Those who do last mostly don't see it pay off with any meaningful connections or career options or creative freedom. Conversely, people who do have a lot of their parents' money find these to be empowering creative opportunities which pay off big time. You can no longer make money from making stuff, so you have to have money to throw it away, which means no one can afford to create, while rich kids become New York improv comedians. Imagine the shame of that. You're like bred to be a useless executive. That's the entire point of you, and the best you can manage is not quite doing a joke. We've maybe forgotten that creativity has value, genuine, measurable, economic, long-term value, but also something more. We've let the tech companies become an alternative to the art. So now, instead of actual art made by actual artists, you get to see kind of okay content made by your kind of internet friends. Maybe part of that is the literal arts funding slipping away and being given to large companies instead of being used to kickstart a new generation. Here in New Zealand, there does seem to be fairly widespread support for increasing arts funding. I think because our culture is increasingly dominated by the United States, and the Americans are a disgusting, shameful people. It wasn't always this way. We used to import most of our culture from the UK. The British were a bit of a cultural juggernaut in the 60s, partly because of their generous arts funding, but also their generous welfare state. Essentially, every British band you could name that started before the 90s started out on welfare, because artists need time and training to get good and time to make stuff, and while that's happening, they just need to sort of subsist for a while. They don't necessarily need to live well, but they do need to live. Then over time, the British gradually stopped funding their arts and humanities until probably the late 90s. It was basically gone. And you can see that happen in the transition from bands to solo acts. They used to do a lot of big budget movies, it's moved to low budget movies. Experimental theatre became stand-up comedy, but basically the artists were still able to support themselves, but because the funding for their content had dried up, they had to make content with lower overheads. Then at the start of the noughties, they drastically changed their welfare system from supporting people out of work to pushing people into work. Now, this system has proven to be more expensive. They don't see the same long-term returns on it, and it just barely juices the employment statistics by forcing people into temporary work and encouraging suicide. But it is the widely accepted system now across the world, as we all follow in the footsteps of the Americans, who, as I mentioned, are a disgusting, vile people. But at the same time as doing this, the British wanted to repeat the past. They wanted their pop cultural boom back. So at the same time as cutting welfare, they increased their arts funding and widened the parameters of creative work to include everything from advertising to software development. Shockingly, that didn't work. It didn't lead to a mass resurgence of their pop culture. It created a world-class marketing industry fueled by unpaid interns. So they didn't get the Beatles too, because the next John Lennon was too busy bagging someone's groceries. For no reason. You can bag your own groceries. So yeah, we live in a world where anyone can download FL Studio. Cameras are cheaper than ever. Everyone can create a fan base of thousands from their bedroom. But for a creative to make a living, it's less attainable than ever. If you want to do anything creative, it's whoever can sustain the losses for the longest wins. So this doesn't create anything worthwhile, it just breeds stagnation. Maybe it's controversial, but I believe that everyone deserves a roof over their head and food, no matter if their work is completely useless to society or if they're making art. Don't get me wrong, I'm not insanely bitter. No, hang on. I am insanely bitter.